love talking about this topic of how to fully fund your PhD because when I was in undergrad and even at the master's level, I had never heard of the term full funding. And when I learned about it in my mid-30s, which is when I did my PhD, it was so eye-opening. I just had to share this information on a huge scale. And I'm a little bit obsessive about fellowships, funding, because I sort of DIY'd my way through these different opportunities. I found a lot starting from undergrad all the way up into my career. So just a little background on myself. My full name is Dr. Vicki Johnson. Feel free to call me Vicki. I'm the founder of an organization called ProFellow, and we have a huge free database of fellowships, fully funded graduate programs. That includes summer fellowships, undergraduate fellowships, doctoral fellowships, professional fellowships, and other interesting opportunities. And we're also going to start adding things like business accelerators. So pretty soon we're going to have even more opportunities. I've also, in the last 5 years, I started my own kind of ProFellow graduate admissions coaching program that had about 400 people go through it. About 300 of them got into fully funded master's and PhD programs, resulting in $35 million in funding. Yes, so I love also talking about the graduate admissions process, how to stand out, how to be competitive. I did a lot of experimentation on this throughout my career, and that is how I became so obsessed with sharing this information. Now, I don't usually talk a whole lot about my personal background, why ProFellow, why am I working on this, but after watching Dr. Hakeem last night talk about his background, I thought, it might be important for me to share where I came from. I mean, his story is extraordinary. Let's be real. So mine isn't that interesting, but the reason I started ProFellow is because, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. This is what ProFellow looks like, but we'll get back to that. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and I grew up in a row house. I went to inner city public high schools. I had two parents raise me. My dad's a Lutheran minister. My mom stayed home when we were growing up. And I think this picture on the other side here, this is me in kindergarten holding up my diploma. I loved school. So I was a big learner, reader. I was in every extracurricular. I think probably a lot of you here probably know this feeling. But the challenge was that the schools that I went to were really under-resourced. And the guidance counselors, I don't think they really knew a whole lot. When I got to high school and I told them, I'm a straight A student, I'm doing all these activities, I'm in Girl Scouts, I'm in this and that, I want to go to Cornell University. That was my dream school. My guidance counselor was like, that's a good idea, or not. Make sure you apply to the University of Delaware. Make sure you have other schools because you have only a 1250 SAT score. So you kind of don't have a chance. Now, I could have taken that advice with and really maybe decided to opt out of the Cornell application, but I decided to go for it anyway, and I went really deep into researching the school, the program, figuring out my story, figuring out my personal statement, and lo and behold, I did get into Cornell, and they gave me a really good financial aid package. So the number one thing I learned when I was younger is that do not listen to people who tell you to recalibrate your goals. Because most of the time, really all of the times, they have no idea what you're really capable of. Because no one, not even your own parents, really know the full story of what you can do. So just take me as an example. I was like, a success story for my high school, which closed down 2 years later for underperformance. But I went on, and then when I went to college, here's the next thing. I still got advice that I wasn't qualified for things like fellowships and doctoral programs because I wasn't an honor student. I had a 3.2 GPA. I wasn't a bad student. I just wasn't at the top of the echelon. So every time you go to the next level, there's a new set of echelons, right? So my advisor, I wanted to go to the New York City Urban Fellows Program, a super competitive, prestigious government fellowship for the year after you graduate. They take 25 students from around the country to go work in New York City government. And my advisor was like, that might be a waste of your time. You don't have any internships. You have 3.2 GPA. But again, I went the extra mile to really research the program, figure out my story, and put together something. And I really focused on the public service and volunteer work that I did all through college as my story as to why I want to do this program. And I even talked about how I was interested in urban education and put that into my story to get into New York City Urban Fellows. We were part of the 9/11 class. So I was there just before 9/11 and then worked in emergency management. So that's all to say. I just tell you this because throughout your life, you're going to get people to tell you that certain things are sort of out of reach. Always take it with a grain of salt, okay? You've got to make your own decision about what it is you want to do. So, let's get into the story of ProFellow. Now, here's the reality. I'm really passionate about talking about funding because I know I have worked with individual McNair programs, and I know that McNair programs get special score if you get into graduate school, right? They want all of you to go to graduate school. But there isn't really a focus on funding. They don't really get special points if you get funding. But for you personally, the most important thing is that you get funding. The reason being is that when you get out of graduate school, you don't want student debt to be the thing that holds you back professionally, personally, and in other ways. The funding is super important. And the problem with funding is that it's still this kind of misunderstood thing. Where's the funding? Who gets the funding? The terminology is different at the graduate level than it is at the undergraduate level. And also, most of the graduate funding is merit-based because you are now a working age adult. So I'm going to give you some tools today to figure out where the funding is so you can make good decisions for yourself. Your number one priority should be your personal well-being, going into your career. But I know that every single one of you can and will go to graduate school. So let's not do this. So the reality about graduate school debt today, if you don't get any funding and you just pay for a graduate degree out of pocket, a 2-year master's degree can cost you, on average, $75,000. It could be a little less than that. It can go also well into $150,000, $200K, right? A non-funded 5-year doctoral degree, if you're to pay for that out of pocket, that will be anywhere from $250,000 to up to $400,000, right? These amounts of money are so big that it's really hard to understand what this means, right? Because it's easy to get student loans, but this is what this means after you graduate. If you had $75,000 in student debt, that means about $1,000 or more per month for 10 years. Yes, my friends. And some of you may not be going into very lucrative career tracks when you come right out of graduate school. If you're at the doctorate level, and I do know PhDs who paid for their PhD and now have $200,000, $300,000 in debt, that's anywhere from $1,500 or more per month. Now, some of you, I don't know, some of you may or may not have kids, may or may not have a mortgage. This really adds up when you start getting into your life. You have other expenses. So I want you to know now this is what this looks like post-graduation. And if you know this now, you can make better decisions for yourself about what's the right next step. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is internal versus external funding. I'm going to talk about full funding. What is full funding? There's 2 in the front here, guys. Come on. And I'll talk about strategies to achieve full funding, and then if I've got enough time, I'll talk about the PhD applicant edge. So yeah, come on in, don't be shy. Come sit down. All right, we got a few seats right here, 3 in the front. All right. I can get these slides to you guys, but you might want to take some notes as you're talking to people here at the conference, because this might not get to you until afterwards. So this is a common scenario. So now I didn't start looking at grad school until about 5 years after undergrad. I decided to work first. So I was working in public health and emergency management, and I realized I need a graduate degree because, I'm starting to hit sort of a ceiling. Senior level positions wanted people with a graduate degree. A lot of my bosses and people I was working with in DC had graduate degrees. So I started to look for funding, and I looked in the way that many people do. I was going online, I'm looking for scholarships, financial aid. I knew about the word fellowships, I was doing that as well. But honestly, I wasn't really finding anything. I mean, I found like a few little awards, 5K here, $500 there. And basically, I came to the conclusion that there really isn't any graduate funding out there because all the awards I were finding were pretty small and not really suited for someone of my background. And even though I'd always wanted to do a PhD, I didn't get into the McNair Scholars Program. I didn't even know it existed at school. No one tapped me for it. No one said, hey, Vicki, think about this. So I just came to the conclusion, not doing a doctorate, can't do that. It's 5 years, I'm doing the math. I would only do the 2-year master's program, and I would only apply to dream schools. If I was gonna make this big investment, it had to be a really good school because I didn't want to go to a medium school or no-name school for the amount of money I was gonna pay. So I was really good at the application at this point because I was someone who was obsessed with that application story. I got into Johns Hopkins, Columbia, Georgetown, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which is the top school in public health in Europe, and they have a 1-year program. But, I kind of thought, well, like Cornell, I'd get this financial aid package, I'm sure they'll help me out. Nada, I got nothing. They didn't give me anything at none of the schools, so that meant I was a good applicant, I got in, but I didn't get any funding from any of the schools. I didn't know how to advocate, I didn't know I should maybe ask a little bit more. I just kind of took that as the thing. So, I had to choose the program that was cheapest, and I put that in quotes because none of them were cheap. I did the London School program because it was 1 year. The tuition was a little bit cheaper, and when I did all the math, that was definitely by far the cheapest. Took out $40K in loans to pay the $25K tuition for the year, and then the $15K to kind of get me into London. I had flights and things, and then I also worked 20 hours a week in a call center, having people hang up on me, and that's kind of how I looked in that time. That's not me, but that was sort of my situation while I'm also in this very rigorous master's program. Now, this is how many students get through graduate school. Many, many students. They think I need to keep working and then I'll do my graduate degree, or I just take out a ton of student debt and worry about it later, or figure out something else, but this is not what I'm gonna recommend for you. All right, because I missed these great opportunities for the master's degree, and even because I didn't know about fully funded doctoral programs, I missed that as well. I could have maybe, potentially, gone direct to PhD. So many years later, I found this really cool fellowship in New Zealand called the Ian Axford Fellowship in Public Policy. I was working in policy. It's a Fulbright award. And I applied for this award, got into it, and it took me to New Zealand for 7 months. And while I was there, a professor at Massey University said, hey, Vicki, you should apply for our PhD program in emergency management. It's like perfectly aligned with what you're doing. And I was like, no way. This is I can't afford this. In my 30s, I still have the other debt. He said, well, Vicki, if you get into this program, you're gonna get a full funding package. You're gonna get your full tuition covered, and you're gonna get an annual stipend of $25,000 a year. I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? I had never heard of full funding. Despite going to Cornell, despite having done fellowships, I had not heard this term before. And when I did the math, that was basically, he was saying he was gonna pay me $250,000 to get my doctorate degree. So this was like mind-blowing to me. But then I thought, oh, this must just be Massey, or this is some specialty thing. I started rooting around, and then I realized, wait a second, PhD programs, a lot of them are fully funded, a lot of them are paid. Why did I not know this? And it's just one of those things, I think, that in academia, there's this, everyone in academia seems to know that this is there, but only certain people have ended up in areas of academia, right? So this is knowledge that's intergenerational, and so it's not getting down to other people. So then I felt that I really have to share this. This is enormous to me. So when I really started, I started getting obsessed with this, and I started realizing here's kind of where the funding plays out. Now there is actually, when you hear about graduate funding, most of it is in PhD programs. And then there is also funding in research-based master's programs. But you know what's really heavily marketed? Professional programs, professional masters, professional doctorates, online programs, and part-time programs for people who are working. And you will have seen, this wasn't as prevalent when I was looking at graduate schools, 15 years ago, but the whole explosion of online programs and for-profit universities and even non-profit universities with online programs, that has exploded. But what you should know is that these are revenue-generating programs, right? They don't exist to help, to produce research. they're selling these programs. I mean, they are competitive, many of them, but they're still a form of revenue. So what I'm going to try to get you all to think about is to get into these ones that offer funding. Now, there's kind of two big sources of funding. If you went to the fellowship, there was another fellowships workshop, and I think that was for STEM. But there is external funding in lots of places, in humanities and others too. The external funding, that's the funding that comes from nonprofits and government agencies. You might have heard of like the National Science Foundation graduate fellowships, or the Paula Daisy Soros Foundation fellowships. There are groups outside of the university that offer these awards. So those, I would say, definitely apply to them. I mean, if it's aligned with your background, you've got time, you've got people, coaching you through the process, it's the same application structure in a way as to graduate school, and you apply to it at the same time. A lot of the deadlines are at the same time as the graduate school deadlines. But the even bigger cash cow is the internal funding. And there's a couple ways. You've got internal fellowships. So you might hear the university has a dean's fellowship or a named fellowship. Sometimes they give those to the very top applicants to get you to choose their school. But more commonly, what you'll get is a graduate assistantship. And that is a research and teaching job that is exclusively for graduate students. And you become like an apprentice in the school, right? You become part of the ecosystem. And then also too, some schools also have other types of funding, travel and conference grants. When I entered my PhD program, they said I was also eligible for an additional $5,000 that I could use to go to conferences or do a professional development course. I made sure to spend every dime of that extra $5K. So you want to ask about the supplemental funding too. Now, when we talk about these different ones, now external funding, like I said, the pros of these external fellowships, they're prestigious, you get a network, definitely apply. I would never ever discourage someone from applying. But the con is that they are nationally or globally competitive, meaning you're applying with other students from lots of other different schools. And in the grand scheme of things, it's a very few awards for the number of people applying, right? So it's sort of like, it's not a foolproof strategy for funding graduate school. But what I really want you to think about is get the full funding from the universities that you're accepted from. So full funding, that's when I talk about a fully funded graduate program, that means they give all, or at least most of the incoming students full funding at acceptance. And you'll see this more commonly at the PhD level than the master's level. Full funding is, again, when you hear people talking about full funding, it should mean the full tuition waiver, so no tuition, you don't even see the bill, and an annual living stipend, which can be anywhere from about $15,000 US per year, up to, I've seen them as high as $50K per year in places like Chicago, maybe some places in California. That's on the upper end. I would say the average is like $20,000 to $25,000 per year. So it's not a ton of money, right? It's meant for you individually. It's not for dependents. It's not for, you may not be able to even care for yourself with that little bit of money, but I would say this is better, right? Tuition waiver plus stipend than taking out debt to cover all of that expense and then maybe having to have an extra job. So a lot of students still do maybe a part-time job while they're doing this, but this is the best way to hopefully leave graduate school without any student debt. Now, why do they give out this money? Well, you might have seen the news lately that maybe a lot of people didn't realize that universities get huge grants from the government as well as companies and intergovernmental institutions. And so when they get this money, they get it to produce research. And the faculty, the faculty have to keep up their research. They're applying for grants. So it trickles down into this thing called the graduate assistantship. And this little job is what helps the faculty produce the research as well as teach your classes. There might be other administrative work. And so this is why this funding is primarily in research institutions. You hear like R1, R2, and other types of research institutions. There are universities that are purely teaching universities, but that kind of funding will not be at the teaching university. It's going to be at the research universities. So the more research the universities you're targeting do, the better. Now, like I told you what the graduate assistantship is, so you're working about 10 to 20 hours per week with faculty. That might sound like a bear, but honestly, there's a lot of benefits to it. You're getting more experience working with faculty. You might be working with your direct PhD supervisor or potentially other faculty. It's not always with the advisor. And this work is complementary to your studies. And in addition, especially if you're in a PhD program, getting a teaching assistantship can be critical if you want to be a professor, because oftentimes they want to see that you have teaching experience. And the primary way that you would get teaching experience while you're studying is through a teaching assistantship. So definitely preference a teaching assistantship while you're in a doctoral program if you want to go on to be a professor, because oftentimes people come out of the PhD with no teaching, and then they're kind of a little bit stuck because they don't have that experience. So this is the best way to do it. So there's a lot of benefits to this job. I talked about the stipend. Sorry about that. So when you get a guaranteed 5 years, like this is what this comes out to. If you get a 2-year graduate assistantship for your master's, that can be like $75,000 or more because it's covering tuition and stipend, $250,000 or more for a 5-year PhD. And some of the students that I work with that are going to schools like Arizona State or Cornell or other places, I mean, when you do the math, they're getting like a $400,000+ in funding, because that's how much money they're getting with the stipend and tuition waiver. Now, what I say is that what I came to realize, the graduate assistantship is the primary source of funding, primary. But not all graduate programs offer this funding. So here's the main challenge. Professional doctorates, which are like the doctorate of medicine, even law school, and then these other types of professional doctorates like the DRPH, the EdD, the PsychD, they don't offer funding because they're not being funded through these research grants. These are professionally oriented, right? You go to law school to learn how to be a lawyer. You go to medical school to learn how to be a doctor. The doctorate of psychology is really geared toward practitioners. You will go on to counseling. So the thing is, you might say, well, that is really what I want to do. I don't want to do research, but stay with me here. There's these options, and then also online and part-time, no money, typically. And then another popular at the master's level, like the MBA, is a very popular professional degree for business. Very hard to get funding. Like, you'll pay a lot of money out of pocket for that. But if you go into a research-based program and on-campus one, much more likely you can get full funding. So the PhD, it's a doctorate of philosophy, but really it's in every discipline. If you were going to do an EdD, I would say definitely look at the PhD in education. If you're going to do the PsyD, look at the PhD in psychology. And then also, if you did want to go to professional school, medical school, law school, you could consider the joint program with the PhD. Now, this is going to be more oriented toward research. If you do the PhD MD, they're training you to be a medical scientist. You could still go on and be a practicing doctor. You could definitely do that, but just know you'll do that. And so they're getting funding from these grants to do medical research. PhD JD is typically training people to become legal scholars and professors. And then there's even joint ones with some of the master's programs. Like I've seen joint, PhD Master of Social Work. So, then you're doing research in that kind of sociological and public policy aspect of social work. So I say explore this, because this is your best chance of getting fully funded. Now, for the master's programs, I probably should have said how to fully fund your master's and your PhD, but it is harder to find funding at the master's level, but the primary thing is you're looking for master's programs that offer assistantships. So I'm going to give you a few little tips for how to find them. Okay, so number one, this is my company, ProFellow.com. We're really a small business. We have this database that has thousands of things listed. We have found and listed more than 1,000 fully funded PhD programs, and we call them fully funded masters, but generally they're master's programs that offer assistantships, so they may fund most students with assistantships. Create a free account at ProFellow. It's totally private, like we don't sell people's information like other scholarship engines, but we work with universities and fellowship organizations. They pay for advertising, which allows you then to not only hear about new fellowships and programs, but get to use this great database. So this is a great place to start. There's lots of stuff in there. It is not the be all end all, because honestly, there's so many programs that are fully funded, we couldn't even get them in the database. So I also recommend a few other options. Number two, also do a Google search. And here's some specific keywords. If you're looking for a PhD program, do the PhD plus the discipline, and then in quotes, that's important, full funding or fully funded. When you put the quotes in there, it tells Google, to find that exact phrase on the websites. So when you put this in, it should show up some schools. Now, this wasn't like this way. I feel like ProFellow started this trend when they realized how much traffic it would get. But now there's a lot of ads. You have to, most of those ads will not go to fully funded programs. I would skip past the ads and try to get to the .edu websites of the universities and look more closely. So let's say you Google PhD Urban Studies full funding. You would find, this was one of the top .edus, University of Florida. Says right on there, fully funded PhD in urban planning. The position is fully funded for 4 years, including tuition, insurance, and stipends, right? So that, you're like, ooh, ding, 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 that's fully funded. Now, so you can do this for any discipline, put in sub-disciplines. Even when you're putting in your discipline, try to think of the other words that a school might use. You might notice that, let's say you're in the field of sustainability, you're interested in environmental sustainability. That could be under environmental policy, environmental engineering. There could be a master's in climate change. There could be a master's in all sorts of earth sciences and society. So try to make sure you look at all the different ways that your discipline is named within academia. And then for master's programs, they usually don't use the terms full funding and fully funded. That's not very common. What you want to do is the master's and then the discipline and then assistantships in quotes. This is the thing, I wish I had known this, because I would have done master's public health assistantships, and I would have found a whole bunch of programs that had assistantships, but I didn't know this. So if I did master's urban planning assistantships, I found, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. They had some information on their website, and it said 60% of their master's in urban planning students get funding. So they have assistantships, fellowships, and other forms of financial aid. So, like I said, they may not fully fund every student, but if you can start to figure out which schools have more funding than others, I would target those schools. And then get friendly with admissions and try to understand, how do I get qualified and eligible to get these assistantships? Often they're going to preference assistantships for doctoral students, but if you are, especially if you're a PhD track master student, like you tell them, in the future, I'm doing this master's and I'm trying to prepare for PhD, it will better qualify you for assistantships, because they're really trying to keep those for the students that are going to do scholarly careers and research and go on to do the PhD. So that's just a little key tip there. And no, don't want to work with it. Okay. Another thing too, now that's two categories, ProFellow 1, then the keywords. Now the problem with Google is that I gave you some keywords and quotes, but sometimes the schools don't have that exact terminology. So the other thing I would recommend doing is get your grad school ranking list for your field. So I looked up PhD programs in psychology, and I found this ranking list. It was like psychology.org, it was something like that. And I looked through it, also had to make sure, is this like an ad or like what is this? It was from a academic association, so I thought, okay, that's pretty legitimate. And then I looked at the schools and it seemed about right. So Stanford's at the top, then Michigan, Ann Arbor, Yale, UCLA, and so forth. So then I thought, okay, let me take a look. Let me just go right down the list here. Let's look at Stanford first. So I Googled Stanford PhD psychology funding. And what came up is, I looked at their page, and it says, to date, the Department of Psychology has been successful in providing financial support for graduate students in the form of a living stipend, tuition, and health insurance through the spring quarter of their 5th year. All right, that is full funding. Notice that they did not use the term full funding. They did not use the term fully funded, but now that you know what full funding is, you can recognize this different way that they've said it is full funding, right? So that's why I say go through the ranking list too, because sometimes you have to dig deep. Now there's also a whole bunch of schools that have pretty pretty terrible websites that don't have much information about funding. Definitely, if you can't find any clear information about funding, ask admissions, okay? This is their jobs to help inform you about what's possible. And I was telling them this morning, go around to the graduate tables, ask them about funding and assistantships. Also too, sometimes people say, I really can't leave my local area. I said, well, look at your local universities. You might be surprised that a local university has full funding in your discipline. I was talking to somebody in Vermont. They didn't realize that their local University of Vermont had a fully funded program in their discipline. So you have to just look, deeply. But in some cases too, like, full funding, I wouldn't say it's like the majority of PhD programs, but there is plenty of options. But you should be open to going to school full-time on campus and potentially relocating for school so that you can find a best fit program that also offers funding. And I think, living in a different location is always a great opportunity for your professional and personal development. So, think about going to different schools, different places to learn more. Okay, so just to recap, check it out in ProFellow. That's a good head start. And then also I want to mention too, I didn't talk about fellowships, but we also list fellowships. There's master's fellowships and doctoral fellowships. Oh, by the way, there's also undergraduate, if you're undergraduate right now, and summer fellowships. All of these have funding. So once you're in graduate school, there is fellowships for dissertation research, professional development, sometimes they give you internships. So you want to bookmark those as well, just so you can be ready to apply, because the deadlines are often sometimes up to a year in advance of when it begins. So you want to, start looking early and bookmarking them. All right, now just to recap, full funding, a part-time university job for graduate students that gives you a stipend and ideally full tuition waiver. Sometimes it's partial, so double check. And then consider pursuing a research-based degree rather than a professional degree. And then use our database to find programs to get started. All right, I think, let me stop there. I have more I can share, but questions? Questions about funding? Go for it.
Made a quick Google search and I found the college that I'm sitting in right now is #1 on computer science fully funded PhD.
Oh, excellent. You mean University of Maryland? Or do you mean the college you're attending?
No, I mean the college I'm standing in right now. Technically I'm not standing right now.
University of Maryland has a fully funded PhD
It's funny.
in computer science. And look, you're right here right now to talk to admissions, right, folks? Excellent. And he just did that on his phone just now. Any other questions about funding? Go for it.
So I've heard like a lot of schools talking about like their graduate students unionizing, like forming a union. What does that mean in terms of funding?
Oh, good question. So graduate students, because they are employees, they have in some cases unionized to get a better deal on their benefits, their salary, and some cases have been successful, but it's kind of just like the faculty unionizing, and there might be contractual, things. So it's harder for you as an individual to negotiate your stipend. Often there's rules, but students may unionize. So is it good or bad to be in a union? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that many schools have unions, unionized graduate students, but power is in numbers to help you get better stipends. But it can be a challenging thing for the school to negotiate this, because they have to think about their overall revenue as well.
I know some of the schools that I talked to today, they were talking about that, and they were saying like over time the amount of stipend that you receive will go up because of those unions.
Yeah, they might have negotiated, because of inflation and standard of living. That might have been one of the things they negotiated, is that you would get a guaranteed bump each year. So that's a good thing, definitely. Sometimes unions though have also meant that because there's the pot of the money has, they have to give bigger stipends, it might need less spots. So that's kind of like one of the downsides. So, it's, I think it's good to, be in touch with the unions that you can be a part of, see what they're doing, see if you agree with it, and, there could be some benefits. Yeah. Go.
like I know PhD programs are like fully funded majority of the time, but how common is it for masters to be funded? Because that's not really common about. I'm always
Yeah.
being told like there's no funding in masters.
It's not super common, so what I'm trying to do is empower you to figure out how to be the uncommon one that gets the
Right.
graduate assistantship. So I found you really have to advocate for yourself and dig deep. I talked about my DIY kind of trajectory. I always had to dig deep to figure out this stuff. And again, I didn't even know about full funding until my 30s. So, you want to be the student, if you want to do masters, you should be asking now, admissions and other groups, are there assistantships? Are master students eligible? If only some master students get the assistantship, what do I need to do to be successful? And sometimes too, it comes down to the faculty who have the grants. So it might be, well, faculty so-and-so, they have this grant, they're gonna have 2 or 3 assistantships. It's in this specific project, then you have to say, do I have any skills or interest in that project? So it's kind of like that ongoing advocacy to make sure you get yourself an assistantship. But my friend Jonathan, actually he was in the Texas system, he went to like a joint Master of Public Policy and Business program, I think it was, I don't know if it was UT Austin, I can't remember which Texas school. And then he got that funded through an external fellowship, but then he still also got a graduate assistantship in another department of the school because he was just super proactive. He went around and asked. He got a research group, a research institute, to come up with a graduate assistantship for him because he found out that they had a research grant and he pitched it and he said, I'd love to do an assistantship and support this grant project because I'm so interested in this topic, and they made one for him. So this is what I'm saying, like this is the kind of, and if you get good at this, if you get good at advocating for yourself and getting deep, this is going to serve you so well in your career. So it's worth trying. Also, I tell people too, you can negotiate your funding. When you get accepted to graduate school, you have an assistantship or they give you a little package. It's worthwhile to talk to admissions about, is there any, as politely as possible, is there any way that you can increase my stipend? It's even better if you have other offers on the table and you can, hey, I got accepted to this school, could you match their package? Or funding is a really important factor for me. Is there any other financial benefits? Sometimes some of the biggest financial benefits are getting subsidized campus housing because the campus housing is so much cheaper than the off-campus market housing. So look into it all. And there's a great website, write this down, PhDstipends.com. It's a big database where students are putting in what stipends they're getting and what financial packages. So you can take a look at the schools that you're applying to and see what students are putting in. And you might find that in the same school, same department, one person got a $19,000 stipend, another person got a $23,000 stipend. Let's say you get your package back and you're somebody that got the $19,000. Maybe there's a little room for negotiation there, right? To see, and you can also see what are other schools in the locality in that region offering their students, and even within your discipline. So that's PhDstipends.com. That's a great database too. Any other questions? Go for it.
Do you have any advice or things for us to consider in terms of where the money is coming from? I'm coming from a place of seeing that we have some changes, particularly like federal administrative changes, and perhaps there might be current sources that are available that may not be available in the near future. So when it comes to getting offered something that might be more secure with the underlying source, do you have anything to say to that end?
I think what's happening right now is unprecedented. Like we've never heard of just unprecedented sudden cuts to grants. So we're in a kind of a weird time. So I don't want to say, I can't read the future. I'm not totally sure. But I have told people that a great place to find news about grants that the university's receiving is in their news section of their website. So your faculty, the faculty of the schools that you're targeting, they might be getting government grants. I mean, a lot of the research grants come from the government because the government is investing in this research, because oftentimes this research can't be done by companies because it doesn't make companies money. Like when you're just in research phase, We don't know what the outcome is gonna be. It's a very, it's a risky thing for a company to do. So depending on the private sector to do all this research is challenging, because companies have to make money. So that's why, a lot of universities are doing the research in medicine, and, I was saying, how do we get our COVID vaccines? That was built on academic research, right? So the government is providing financial incentives for universities to do this research, but there is grants from other places. I mean, corporations do provide grants as well to universities. There might be philanthropic foundations that care about certain areas of research. It's hard to know who's got what, but you can look in the news section, because often if a faculty member gets a big grant, usually the university will do a press release on it. Usually, not always. They should always highlight faculty that get grants, but sometimes you'll find that and it's like, oh, I gotta talk to that professor to see what kind of opportunities might be coming up for graduate students. They're doing anything in tech and engineering, medicine. It's kind of like investigative journalism or research. It's have fun with it. Have fun with it. You can go down a dark, deep rabbit hole of trying to figure out who's got what money, but also conversations. I mean, sometimes, like I said, it's not online, so you have to be willing to go talk to people and find out. I have another little strategy in here about using Google Scholar to figure out some things. Should I keep going? Was there one other question about funding? We can always do it again. Okay, let's keep going. I have a few other things. I have 3 common applicant mistakes for the doctorate students. One mistake is not speaking to potential PhD advisors before applying. I'm hoping that all of you know about faculty outreach because of your McNair training and the resources that you have, but actually faculty outreach is very, very important. This faculty outreach, all that means is that you're emailing potential faculty in these PhD programs to see if your interests align. There's a couple templates online about how to reach out to faculty, even on ProFellow. But essentially you're introducing yourself, you let them know that you're an interested graduate student, and that you have a dissertation topic or area of research that you believe is aligned with their body of research, and you're trying to explore opportunities to work with them in the doctoral program. Now, a lot of times you won't get a response. Some schools even have a policy that the faculty are not supposed to respond, especially in the big name schools, because they get emails from people all over the world or trying to get their attention. But I would say you guys have a very special connection with McNair. Actively use your McNair network to get faculty introductions. And if you don't know, if there's a school that you're targeting, you see faculty there, ask your McNair director, is there anyone in this network that knows this person who can maybe introduce me to Dr. Smith and so-and-so at the school? Try to use those mutual connections. This is how stuff gets done. It's through those introductions, because if you can get introduced through someone in the McNair network, very high probability that faculty member is going to respond. But also too, if you really can't find any kind of mutual contact, you can mention in your email, I'm a McNair scholar at this university. That should get their attention. Put it in the very first line. He said in the thing this morning, also put it under your name in your CV, and I thought, oh, that's a good idea. Do that because they will, because they know that you're almost like a pre-vetted candidate, right? You got into the McNair program, you've been going through graduate training or doing research. That's what McNair means. So, use that. This is like your secret weapon to get into these schools. And this is really important because now, especially with all this like funding volatility, you got to talk to faculty to see who has money. Now, if funding has been cut, it does mean that some schools they're rescinding offers because now they don't know if they have funding to fund some of the incoming students. So there's going to be some uncertainty for quite some time. So be patient. Try to figure out what's next. You could start faculty outreach as soon as now for this coming fall application cycle, or wait till May or June. Maybe let the press die down a little bit. Also, they're still trying to process and figure out the current students for fall of 2025. So this is super important. Try to do it whenever possible, and don't get discouraged if someone doesn't respond. you know, follow up maybe 2 or 3 times. You should also email the department chair, you know, who usually is like the main admissions contact for a doctoral program, and ask them for their advice. You know, these are generally my research interests. I'd be interested in speaking to Dr. So-and-so. Do you have any advice? Would you recommend that I reach out to them directly, or is there an opportunity to meet them at an upcoming info session? And hopefully the chair will respond, right? I hope they're responding. But this is really important. It gives you that little bit of an in. Now, mistake number 2 is not stating a clear career goal. I just changed the slide this morning because someone asked me, you know, well, I'm not really sure what I want to do, but I know what I want to research. Your career goal in your application is super important, because I say these graduate programs do not exist to help you fulfill a dream or because you love learning. Every single graduate program on the planet is a training program. They are training a generation of people who are going to go into certain career tracks. And in doctoral programs, that typically is the academy. They're trying to train people to become professors. Some more innovative programs or less old school programs are also training people for jobs in industry and nonprofit and cultural institutions. So keep that in mind. If you don't have a clear career goal, the selection committee can't understand why do you want to do this PhD. Put that career goal in there so that you align with their training mission. Because if you think about it, a candidate with a really clear career goal that aligns with the program is going to be stronger than a candidate that's kind of vague about what they want to do next. In fact, it might even give the impression that you're sort of undecided or not that committed. Okay, so even if you don't know what your career goal is, pick a possible goal, right, and put it in there. And then mistake number 3, I always say this goes back to my first story. If you believe that you can't get into your dream school, if you don't believe that you can get in, you won't get in. You have to believe it deeply that you deserve the spot, you're qualified for the spot, and honestly, the more preparation that you do for your applications, the more confidence that you'll have that you deserve that spot that's there. So preparation really quells fear. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection that we all face. That just comes from societies telling us, oh, you know, you're not qualified, lower your goals. You gotta believe it, because this is my favorite little, comic right here. If you can't see the screen, it's 2 guys, they're trying to get up a really steep hill. There's a little sign that says goal at the top, and they're carrying this huge rock called self-doubt. This self-doubt comes from years and years and years and years of messaging that you get from all over the place, from Instagram to your parents to society, your boss, your professors, your friends, that are trying to tell you to either lower your goals or be realistic, change your career track. That develops self-doubt that you already naturally have in your mind. It's from your physical body. You got to put it down. And it does say, maybe it would be easier if we put this down. And it's true. So when you get rejected from programs, that's not the end of the story. Some people, it takes them 2 or 3 times before they get into a doctoral program, because these programs accept on average 5 to 7 people. That's the average. I know programs that accept 1 person a year. And then there's some programs that maybe it's around 10 or 15, but that isn't like the norm. So it's a very small number of spots, and they have a lot of qualified applicants, right? So you gotta do everything you can to get your edge, get your story down, your career goal, talk to faculty, find the funding, and then put your natural passion into your application. And I always say, here's my little framework for telling a great application story. So I say that the program, that's the story of you in your application is 3 parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning of the story is where you are right now. Everything you've done till now, what motivated your choice of discipline, what motivated your certain things that you've done, and also what has happened that's motivated you to have this career goal. That's everything till now. The end of the story is in the future. Post-graduate school, it's going to be the career goal, where you want to be, who you want to serve, what problems do you want to help solve. And you got to be pretty specific about what that is to make it clear that this is a very important goal for you. The middle part is where the people, I call it the hook. You might have heard of, the hero of the story, the hero's journey. You hear a lot of about this in storytelling, and I do hear people telling candidates that you're the hero of the story. No. You are not the hero of the story. The graduate program or fellowship is the hero. And the reason being is that they have the resources, tools, faculty, funding, and opportunity that you need to get to your goal, which is an impact goal that serves other people, right? So make them the hero, let them know why you want this program, let them know why you're applying to their program versus other programs, what are you gonna get out of it, how are you gonna leverage it, how are you gonna get back, how are you gonna pay it forward, how are you gonna be the most committed, reliable, and excited student in the program, and then they'll read that and say, gotta accept this person. All right, so that's the storyline, you, the program hero, and your goal. And these are the three key components of your application story. If you nail that, you can nail jobs, you can nail awards, you get people tapping you for opportunity well into your career. So I love teaching this. Actually, I'm writing a book on this. I have a formula that I developed that's based on this that helped me get into 4 fellowships, top graduate schools, business accelerator programs, and other interesting opportunities. All right, I've done enough talking. I was going to talk about faculty outreach, but I actually don't know what time it is. How much time do we have left? Does anyone know?
5:24. Maybe 5 minutes.
Oh, we have 5 minutes. Why don't we do any more questions right now? Okay, go. I saw you go.
Could you just give us like an example of a career goal that you used?
Oh, yes. Okay, so for doctoral programs, if you find it's quite a traditional doctoral program where they brag about sending people on to professorships in the academy, probably your aligned career goal would also be to become a professor. Hopefully that is a possible career goal for you, if not the career goal. So I like to be really specific. So don't just say I want to be a professor. You would want to say I want to be, a tenure track. My career goal is to become a tenured professor, at an R1 institution like X. Put in an example university that is doing innovative research in this body or this area, or they have some other aspect that's unique. And the reason it's good to give an example is that when someone reads that, they can visualize you. Like they might not know really what you look like, but now suddenly I had a student that was looking at University of Maine because they do a lot of green energy work. So they put that as the example because they're doing like the most innovative research in this green energy technology. And then I was like, okay, now I can see them walking the campus at Maine as a professor doing this work. So it helps to visualize you in the mind. So get specific. Think of a job title at a example organization, ideally one that is recognizable, and then having a specific social impact. So not just, I'm a leader, but like, who are you helping? What problems are you solving? And then likewise too, if you're going into the professional world, you can't say, my career goal is to be a senior strategist at a leading nonprofit that's doing microfinancing in Africa that's serving women entrepreneurs to help them build intergenerational wealth. Like that specific. I don't know if anyone else will advise you to be that specific, but it's worked very well for me and my students. So think about that specificity. And then don't worry if that's actually what you end up doing. Hopefully it's an authentic goal, not just something you've made up that you think sounds good. Just make it really specific so that the reader can visualize you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have one?
So I know you mentioned how we should be reaching out to faculty advisors for a PhD. It's something that it's like oftentimes highlighted, but I am looking to get my master's first, and what I've kind of found is that I'm not finding faculty advisors that are directly connected to the research I want to conduct, but I like the curriculum of the program and I like the school. So since it is a master's, would you suggest that I follow the curriculum or I find that one person that I connect with?
Oh, good question. Actually, at the master's level, outreach is not very common because you may get a senior, you might get you typically get like a graduate advisor in your program, but it may or may not be, they're not really typically overseeing your research. You may have a master's program where you're doing a research thesis at the end, and that advisor may help with that research, but it's usually a much smaller project, right? You're doing it in the course of a summer, something like that, or 2 semesters. So it's not expected to reach out to faculty for a master's level program. However, that said, so if you reach out to faculty saying you're a master's student, you may not hear back. They might be really preferencing like emails from, doctoral level candidates, if they're responding at all. But I still think it's good to connect with faculty. If you can go to info sessions, if you can go to these graduate school fairs and meet representatives, that only helps strengthen, because there was an experiment that was done. You know when there's an election and you see signs all over town like John Smith is running for office, and you might not have ever seen this person, you don't know what they look like, they don't know what they stand for, but you've seen their name like 40, 50 times all around town. There's actually a psychological aspect to you getting your name and face in front of selection committees and people who are selectors, like faculty, because they'll remember your name and face if they've met you before. Then when they get your written application, they have like an emotional, physical connection to the paper application. So it is good to go to info sessions, talk to faculty. It will also help you generate ideas about dissertation topics, or how do I connect my story to this faculty member? Because the thing is, you still want to try to get an assistantship, right, at the master's level. And so those will be run by faculty. So one way to get talking to faculty too is to ask admissions, which faculty, one, can I apply for assistantships as a master's student? And if yes, who are the faculty that are basically administering the assistantships, and what types of projects are they offering? And then you can start talking to them. Because if you can develop rapport for any faculty that's got assistantships, it will strengthen your possibility of getting it. Because they're handpicking. I mean, they're handpicking who they want. So it's all about the relationships, which I know is very intimidating sometimes, but I think faculty will want to hear from McNair scholars. So that's your big plus. Any other questions? All right. Are we at the end? Is it 5:30? Okay, I know you guys need to go rest. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.